Hi folks, so in this video I just want to go through 3 different shelter systems. Now what I tried to do was to get the same weight for a hammock, a tent and also a bivy setup. So the same weight all the way through, but I also wanted to consider a few other factors as well. So in terms of the practicality of different shelters for different trips, the volume of each shelter and things like that. So I think comparisons of tents and hammocks and tarps and things like that have been done quite a lot. So there's lots of information already out there, but hopefully this will sort of look at things in a slightly different way. And as I say, you know, by comparing systems that are the same weight, it should give you a bit of an idea of you know, what you can get for the same weight, similar volume, things like that, and also some of the practicalities. So just running through quickly with the basic components of each shelter system. So I really like using a hammock, and the reason for this obviously is comfort, but it also gets me up out of the moisture if there's any rain. You're not on the ground, you're not picking up mud and things like that on your shelter. So in terms of just general hygiene and keeping clean, the hammock is really good in addition to those comfort benefits. Now, to get the weight to something comparable to the other 2 systems, what I've actually got here is a netless hammock, and this is actually the lightest netless hammock I could find. Possibly get lighter ones if you go for a smaller hammock, but this is a full-size 11-foot hammock, and this is from Dutchware. It's a Cloud 72, I think it is, Cloud 72 material, and yes, a netless hammock with an adjustable ridgeline. And what I did was I paired that with a tarp that I've had for quite a while, which is a Mount Laurel Designs asymmetrical tarp. So a fairly minimalist tarp, and that's a DCF fibre as well, which makes it quite light. So that particular setup there gets me down to 367 grams, okay, for the hammock and the tarp combined, and the volume, if you're going to put that in your pack, is 2.9 litres, so 2,900 mils. So that's kind of where I'm starting. Now, I have to confess that I actually use a different hammock most of the time. I prefer to use one of these chameleon hammocks, which actually does have a net. So I quite like using this particular hammock because it has, because it's fully enclosed, so that anything you have inside the hammock with you is not going to fall out easily during the night and end up on the ground. And also you've got that bug protection built in, but it does add significantly to the weight. If you combine this with the minimalist tarp from Mount Laurel Designs, it comes out as 669 grams. So not quite twice the weight, but getting close to it. So yeah, what I'm trying to do is sort of reduce things a bit by using this netless hammock, but that of course means that, you know, you probably need some sort of bug protection, so maybe just a head net or something like that, which doesn't weigh very much, or I could possibly even put a half bug net over this, which I made a while back. Okay, so the next setup to look at is the tent. Now, if possible, I will use a hammock, but the problem with a hammock, of course, is that you don't always have trees. And one of the reasons I started using a tent again, I mean, I've used tents historically, but one of the reasons I got this ultralight tent, which is a Z-Pax Plexamid, is that I was doing some trips above the tree line, so there wasn't access to trees most of the time. And also for trips, so I've been doing a lot of coastal walking. I've been walking the New South Wales coastline from the Queensland border down to the Victorian border. And for those trips, I'll be staying quite often in caravan parks. So I want some level of privacy and security. But also in coastal areas, particularly during summer, you get a lot of insects. So it's good to have that bug protection as well. Now, just by comparison, this tent, as it is, obviously it's a single wall tent, so it combines your tarp and your bug protection and so forth into one package. It weighs 461 grams and the volume is 3.4 litres. So it's a little bit more volume than the hammock and tarp, but you do have that flexibility of being able to camp, where there's no trees. And I probably don't need to go into the pros and cons of tents. People are aware of that. One of the downsides from my point of view, there's a couple of things in particular. One is condensation, so being a single wall tent, if you've got a lot of cold temperatures or rain and things like that, you can get condensation on the inside of the tent. And so I often have to cover my quilt with some of my rain gear or something like that, just in case I touch up against the walls. I have woken up a few times with a wet foot box. The other thing I do a lot is just sponge down the inside of the tent sort of regularly during the night, just to sort of keep the amount of condensation to a minimum. But yeah, a bigger tent would probably work better in that respect. So something like an ultraplex or something like that with a little bit more length and steeper walls. The other thing that bugs me about tents is that you're on the ground and you're constantly picking up crap off the ground, whether it's mud or leaves and things like that. So I always have to go through a process of cleaning the thing down before I pack it away each day, and that can be annoying. And as other people have pointed out, because you can get condensation on the inside, when you pack up the tent, potentially everything gets wet, so the floor and the fly and all of that sort of thing. If you get an opportunity, you can dry it during the day, but that is a consideration if you've got everything together in one package. And that's why double wall tents are quite popular, to avoid those problems with condensation and so forth, and being able to pack up the different parts of the tent separately. But double wall tents are a lot heavier. So anyway, that's my tent. I should mention that what I've considered doing recently, and as you can see this is all still wrapped up, so I've never actually used this, using a ground sheet. So I've had a ground sheet poncho in the past made of DCF, but this one is actually a polycryo material. So what I'm thinking of doing in future with the tent is using this as a ground sheet to give it a bit of protection. It's only weighs like 78 grams or something like that, so it will kind of prevent all the mud and dirt getting on the tent. It's not going to do anything for the moisture, but it'll at least help with that part of it, when you're packing up, not so much cleaning later on. So given a couple of those issues that I talked about, condensation and having to pack everything up together and getting it all sort of wet and that, I thought I would give a bivy a try. So I haven't really used bivvies in the past. I have slept under tarps, and of course I've used tarps with my hammock setup, so I'm familiar with setting up tarps and things like that. But I've never used a proper bivy. The closest I get is swags, so I've used swags quite a lot for camping, but of course that's a whole different kettle of fish. Swags, if you're not familiar, are just a heavy canvas material, and they're really just for car camping. You just roll them out. They've got everything included, like your mattress and the whole thing, and you just roll them out like your bed. And some of them have a raised top, similar to bivvies, similar to some types of bivvies, and others, you just use like a bed and cover yourself up if it rains. So I'm not that familiar with bivvies, but I know the basics of using that sort of shelter. So what I got was a Bora bivy, and this is their basic bivy, which has bug netting at the top where your head is, and has a side zipper. So I thought side zipper would be the way to go to get in and out a bit easier and that sort of thing. These are super lightweight. I also bought a Bora tarp to go with it, so that's a 7 by 9 foot tarp. Sorry if I keep jumping between different types of units here. I'm familiar with metric units principally, but I'm also familiar, but I also fairly commonly use the empirical measurements with things like tarps and weights when you're using weights for diving and things like that. Anyway, so that was the setup I came up with for the bivy, and I'll probably also include the polycryo ground sheet with that as well, just to sort of keep the bivy clean. But, you know, coming back to what I was saying about the single wall tents, because you've got now your rain protection and your shelter separate, so you've got a separate tarp and the bivy, you can actually pack them up separately, and you don't have to worry about getting your bivy wet when you pack up a wet tarp. So that's a bonus. You know, you could put your tarp in the back pocket of your pack and actually put the bivy inside where it's dry. And you're also probably not going to be touching up against the walls so much with a tarp setup, unless you pack it down really close, but then you do have the bivy for some protection there and for some protection from spray. So it kind of works a little bit like a double wall tent in that respect. People do get concerned about condensation on the inside of the bivy, but I've been told, at least from reviews and so forth, that that's not really an issue with these ones. Certainly in terms of the netting, that means since most of the moisture is coming from inside your body, I mean, there will be some from sweat and so forth, but most of it will be coming from your breath. That's kind of dealt with by having that open top part of the bivy where you've got the bug net. So hopefully, I guess I'll find out whether condensation is an issue inside the bivy or not, but I've heard positive things. And the other thing that I thought was appealing about the bivy was the flexibility. So being able to, for example, just use the bivy by itself if you're in dry conditions, or if you're inside a shelter or something like that, and keep yourself cocooned and protected from insects and mice and things like that while you're sleeping. So you've got that flexibility if you happen to use cabins or other types of shelter. You've got some protection there. You certainly wouldn't put your tent up inside a hut, for example, but you could certainly sleep in a bivy inside a hut. And the other thing is, you know, the flexibility with your where you camp. You know, you don't need a particular footprint as such. You know, if you've got trees and things like that, you can position the tarp so it gives you coverage, which is probably a bit more difficult with a tent where you need a proper decent flat area. I also find I have a lot of trouble getting the tent pitched properly. I think I probably will find it a lot easier to pitch a tarp than a tent. Anyway, I don't think I gave you the stats on those. So the bivy and the tarp are 446 grams, and the volume is 1.65. So 1.65 litres. So this is the lowest volume option. In terms of weight, it's halfway between the hammock and the tent. But just remember that the hammock, that particular hammock, doesn't have a insect net on it. Okay, so both the tent and the bivy have insect protection, whereas the hammock doesn't. You would have to use a bug net or something like that, and keep yourself covered up with the quilt. So that that's something to consider, whether that's practical or not. So just in summary, then you've got 446 grams for the bivy and tarp and a volume of 1.65 litres. For the tent, you've got 461 grams and 3.4 litres. And for the hammock and tarp, you've got 367 grams and 2.9 litres. So the clear winner in terms of weight is the hammock and the tarp, but the clear winner in terms of volume is the bivy and the tarp. Now I should just point out, with the bivy and tarp, you can actually go lighter than this. So I'm using a sil poly tarp, which is not the lightest option. If you get a tarp the same size as this, so 7x9 from Z-Packs, a Cuban fibre tarp, you can get the combined weight of these two items down to 308 grams. So that's nothing. 308 grams really for your shelter. Or another alternative is to combine the bivy with a poncho tarp. So I've got one here from I think it's Sea to Summit or something like that. This is a fairly heavy one, I can't remember the weight on this, but you can get a Mount Laurel Designs poncho tarp. It'll get you down to 405 grams with the bivy plus the tarp, so they're both around the 200 gram mark. Now that is lighter than the setup I've got here, and it also gives you your rain protection as well, so your rain gear to wear during the day. However, personally, I would be inclined to still take my rain shell, so my jacket and pants, because you still need some protection on the bottom, and I would tend to use those for warmth and wind protection anyway. So I don't think it saves that much. Perhaps what it does is saves you the need to carry an umbrella. But actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a separate video looking at comparing ponchos and umbrellas and shells and things like that, because I think that's something that you need to take into account, the effectiveness of the different types of rain protection, as well as how they integrate with the rest of your system. But one of the things with these poncho tarps is that they're not very big. They don't give you a lot of coverage. So the Mount Laurel Designs one looks interesting because it can close down a bit at the back. It's got extra tie-out points, and it's a bit wider than most of the poncho tarps, but still the coverage is pretty minimal. So that would be something to factor in, whether you're going to get enough coverage from it. Certainly the 7x9 tarp gives you quite a decent amount of coverage. So that's the basics, just comparing each shelter separately. So what I thought I would do next in this video, and I'll try not to make it too long, is just quickly run through and look at what else goes with these particular items, and consider the total weight and volume. So let's begin again with the hammock and tarp. So if we put those together and say that's our shelter system, we're going to need a couple of other things. So we're going to need a sleep system to go with it. So with a hammock and tarp, you do have other options. You can use a sleeping mat and things like that, or just some foam to line the inside of the hammock. But generally speaking, the best thing to do is to take a underquilt for hammocks. So that gives you the best warmth and the most comfort when you're in your hammock. So what I've got here in this bag, now this bag is around about 20 litres, and I've got a couple of these bags here. So the reason I used 20 litre bags was because I wanted to sort of get a bit of a comparison in terms of how much space they would take up inside a 20 litre pack. Now that's 20 litre for the main compartment. Now my pack here, the Mount Laurel Designs Burn, has a 25 litre volume in the main compartment. I have looked at getting a smaller pack for trips where I don't need as much weight, so summer trips and things like that. So that's again why I thought the 20 litres would be a good volume to work with. I can't compress things as much in these plastic bags as I can in a pack, because they're obviously not as strong as the pack material, but you can get a general idea of the volume that you're going to use up in your pack. So what I've got in here is a Hammock Gear 20 degree quilt, and that's a 3/4 length quilt, a down quilt, and I've got a 20 degree Z-Packs top quilt. So these combined are amongst the lightest that I've been able to find anyway for 20 degree quilts. So I'm going to chuck my lightest hammock setup in with these and just try and compress those down a bit. Okay, so you can see takes up roughly half that volume. So when you actually weigh these, the total weight for the sleep system and the shelter system with the hammock is 1.3 kilos, so 1,312 grams. And the volume is 11.25 litres. 11.25 litres. So in a 20 litre pack, basically just over half of the volume in the pack is taken up by your shelter and sleep system. So on top of that, obviously you have to be able to fit your food for whatever distance you're covering, and anything else you're carrying. So if you've got a warm jacket or anything like that, maybe some sleep clothes or something like that would need to fit in here as well. But just to give you an idea, 11.25 litres for the hammock system. Now obviously if I'm going to use my bigger hammock, I'm going to be increasing that weight a bit, and I'm also going to be increasing the volume, because you can see that's obviously a larger hammock with the insect net on it. Now personally I would use this system in preference to the others whenever I was doing entirely wilderness based hikes that were below the tree line. So I'd happily assume that I could use my hammock in each night for a trip that's predominantly in wilderness areas, that has where you're not having to pre-book specific sites, okay, because site selection is very important for a hammock. But if you've got your choice of sites when you arrive at a campsite, and some flexibility where you camp, plenty of trees around, things like that, then this would be my preferred setup. Now I'm thinking of using this setup, for example, on the Bibbulmun track in Western Australia. So I think that the Bibbulmun track will be mostly through forested areas. So that way, you've always got access to somewhere you can put up a hammock. The coastal areas, there may be some issues there, but I think in general I should be fine. I've certainly used the hammock for other similar wilderness-based trips, like for example the Larapinta Trail, the Great North Walk in Sydney. There was one place there I had to actually camp on the ground, and that was because they didn't allow hammock camping, so that was very early in the trip. What I did in that case, I took a very lightweight sleeping mat, and you could also perhaps use a foam mat as well, which would also supplement your hammock system as well. You could put the mat underneath your feet for a bit of insulation there. But I took this 3/4 length Neo Air, which is a fairly light option if you do need to have some sort of go to ground option. The tarp that I've got here is not a particularly good one for going to ground, because it has very minimalist coverage. It's fine when you're in a hammock because of the way the hammock lies and the way the tarp sort of wraps around the hammock a bit. But if you're sleeping on the ground with this, coverage is not particularly good. I've also used this on trips like the South Coast track, the Overland track, Great North Walk. I don't know if I mentioned that one. Anyway, a few different places like that where you're going to be in the forest all the time, or most of the time. Okay, so let's have a look at the next option, which is the tent. So for the tent, we'll assume that the ground sheet goes with it. I use a full-size sleeping mat. So this is 25 by 72, so it's a wide. I can't personally sleep on the really narrow ones. As I said, I have used these. I get a small amount of sleep with them, but this is the really small, narrow pad. But really, if I'm going to be sleeping, night after night, I want something that's really comfortable. So that's why I've got this one here, which is a Big Agnes. I'm actually thinking trying a Nemo Tensor as well, again in the wide, because I've heard they're pretty comfortable as well. I get a reasonable sleep on these. Obviously, it's not as good as the hammock, but it's not bad. So what I do when I'm packing my pack, so if you imagine this is the inside of my pack, I shape this so it takes up the part against my back, okay, and gives me a bit of protection from anything poking into me. Then I put my tent in. Now, because this is a Plexamid, it has a couple of metal or fiberglass pieces that give the roof some shape, so you can't actually sort of compress it down anymore. It's got kind of got that shape already. So I put that in vertically to give the pack a little bit of structure as well. So it's almost like a pseudo frame. Probably not very effective as a frame, but you know, it does give the pack a little bit of structure. And then what I do is I pack my quilt around the outside of the tent. Okay, so unlike the hammock, things don't sort of pack towards the bottom of the tent. You've got things sticking up, but those things sticking up do give you some structure, okay, and some protection as well. So, you know, if you had food in here and things like that, they're not going to be poking you in the back because you've got something here to protect you. Okay, so obviously, again, I can't pack this down as much as it is inside the actual pack, but just to give you a comparison, so the weight on this one was 1.498 kilos. Okay, so close to 1.5 kilos. And the volume is 10.6 litres. Okay, so again, the volume difference, and this actually surprised me because I thought with the underquilt the hammock was going to be a greater volume, but actually it's only a slight difference. Okay, so you're only looking at another 600 or so mils in volume, so not much at all really. So really you're looking at pretty much the same sort of volume between the hammock and the tent setup, and a slight increase in weight using the tent over the hammock. And again, that probably surprises some people that you can get a hammock setup lighter than a tent. Now, there are lighter tents, obviously. There is the new Z-Packs tent, a single-person tent, which is a little bit lighter. But that's all single-walled. If you went for a double-walled tent, you're going to significantly increase this weight. So just be aware of that. But anyway, there's your comparison. So obviously you put your food and everything like that in there. You know, it might kind of restrict you a little bit because you've got this bit of a structure here, but you know, should work. I find it's fine. I can sort of pack my food in there, or sometimes I might even put the food down the bottom and put the quilt on top. And you can pack anything else, like, you know, thermals, like, you know, a warm jacket or anything, or rain gear can go around the outside. Okay, so finally, let's have a look at the bivy and the tarp. So we'll take the tent out and we'll just see how the bivy and the tarp compare. I should just point out, I've been putting in these enclosed bungees on the inside. I've just been sort of threading them through. This is something that there's a video for this from Dutchware that shows you how to do this. So because it's not a DCF tarp, that particular one, I've got these bungee in here to sort of take up any tension during the night, you know, if the tarp starts to get a little bit slack. So that's just on my guy lines. So let's just stuff all this stuff in. Now again, if the tarp was wet or dirty, I would just keep it outside, you know, in the back pocket of the tent. But you can see there, I'm going to have basically the same stuff as I did for the tent. I'm going to have my nice comfortable pad. I'm going to have my 20-degree down quilt, and then I've got the bivy and the tarp, and also potentially the polycryo sheet as well, which will probably end up on the outside of the pack because you don't really want it inside if it's dirty. So pushing that down should give you an idea of the volume there, how much it takes up inside a 20-litre pack. And looking at the stats, The weight is 1.483, so again close to 1.5 kilos, so similar sort of weight to the tent setup. The volume is 8.85 litres, so it is significantly less volume than the tent, possibly because the tent has that extra structure to it, which might affect the volume a bit. Maybe you can't compress it down as much. This stuff obviously you can just compress all the way down, so I found that the volume was a little bit less for the bivy and the tarp. But really, it's not a big difference, and I think that's probably something that would surprise a lot of people, that you're not really saving that much by going to a bivy over just using a tent, but you do have that extra flexibility. I'm keen to try it out, see how it goes, and also with a single wall tent versus a bivy, perhaps a bit more protection from condensation for your sleeping bag, a bit more flexibility where you can camp. The option to pack items up separately so that you're not getting your sleeping area wet or dirty, and so forth. And I did mention as well that if you go for the Z-Packs tarp, you can save yourself just over 100 grams, so that's a consideration, but for a considerable increase in price. Okay, so the final thing I'll just mention, I've compared all of these so you can see the difference, but one other thing to consider is the number of stakes that you need. So for both the tent and the bivy, /tarp setup, I would take 8 to 10 of pegs, so that weighs 126 grams for what I'm using, okay, which is a couple of these MSR groundhogs, and then some of these little aluminium V stakes. Those are quite good for their quite good holding power for their weight. And I've also got a couple of titanium hooks as well, which I mainly carry because they work with my cook system as well. Now, if I was just taking the hammock, I could actually get away with just 2 of these stakes, and I'd take the groundhogs. So 2 of those, they're 15 grams each, so 30 grams. So there is a weight saving there with the hammock again, because you don't need as many tent pegs. So hopefully that's been useful, and it's been a while since I put a video together, and I'm sorry for that. I've got a whole heap of videos that I want to put together, but I've just had so much on work-wise and that, and it's just been such a crazy couple of years. I just haven't been able to do it. So I'd really be keen to hear your comments and thoughts on the different shelter systems, pros and cons, that sort of stuff. Obviously, there are a lot of videos out there comparing these different shelter systems, but hopefully this has looked at it in a slightly different way, and again, trying to match them up for similar weights and that, so that there's more of a direct comparison of what you can get for roughly the same weight. So thanks for listening, and I'll look forward to your comments.